New Hampshire, August 22nd, Mount Washington south to Mount Eisenhower Trail Junction. We drove to the top of Mount Washington. It was a sunny day in the valley, but it was in the clouds at the summit. We had known that the temperature would drop up here, but still we were not prepared for this type of frigid cold, with temperatures in the 30s and windy. We purchased hats and gloves, very expensive. We had a hard time finding the Appalachian Trail up here, mostly due to the low clouds. The whole top was in the clouds. We also had trouble finding any signs for the AT after we left the parking lot. The AT is poorly marked on the summit, very few white blazes up here. After starting out on the wrong trail, we met some hikers and asked them if they knew where the AT was up here. They pointed us in the right direction, and we were finally off on the AT heading south. The trail was excessively rocky, with large rocks, small rocks, and boulders. We were descending gradually to the Lake of the Cloud Hut. After about a mile on the trail, the clouds lifted a little, and we could see Lake of the Clouds Hut. It was great to see the hut in this beautiful area. Many day hikers passed us going up to the summit. We reached the hut and entered a big dining area with the kitchen all in one open area with large windows and great views. We looked around inside, and it was very clean, and we found several large bunk rooms and a large bathroom with composting toilets and sinks. We looked out the big window in the dining area, and the alpine was superb. Some light rain was falling outside, and we were worried because we did not bring any wet gear with us. We sat down and ate our lunch, and the sun had come back out. We went back outside and began searching for the trail. We had trouble finding the AT. There were a few trails that left the hut, and once again we got onto the wrong trail. We finally found a sign that someone had wrote with a marker the AT, but it was not the trail. We finally did find the trail and was back on our way to the Eisenhower Junction, our turnaround point. The sun was warm, and we took off the extra warm weather gear that we had purchased. The views were great up here. The hiking was hard over rocks and over boulders. We passed several alpine vegetation and small scrub brush. We were running late, but kept pushing on because we wanted to make it to the Eisenhower Junction, and we were pushing it past our turnaround time. We finally reached the junction and did not spend too much time there, as we needed to get back to the parking lot before the auto road closed. Light rain had started to come down again, and we put back on our extra cold weather clothing. We were worried about getting wet and cold with this wind chill. People have died up here from hypothermia because they were not prepared for this sudden weather changes. We got back to the hut, and the sun had come back out. Such a beautiful view with the sun late in the day breaking through the clouds. We did not stop at the hut because we had to push it out before the auto road closed. I wanted to do the Tuckerman Ravine Trail back up to the summit, which we did much to Dave's dismay. It was nice at the beginning seeing a new trail, but we were walking around on top of rocks, but going up. We saw Tuckerman Ravine, and I was glad to see it. However, the final climb up was awful. It was really hard, and almost as hard as the rock slide that we went up on the Great Gulf Trail that we did in 1997. Dave had broken one of his poles going up, and the wind was picking up with a chill as we were getting closer to 6:30. It looked like it was getting dark because the clouds had moved back over the summit. We were beginning to get worried that we were not going to make it in time, when out of the fog, we heard children yelling, and we knew that we must be near the summit. We emerged into the parking lot and started our slow braking process, descending the summit. When we reached Route 16 and were heading back to our campsite at Dolly Cop Campground, we reached the entrance to the Great Gulf Trail and saw lots of cars parked on the side of the road with lots of people outside taking pictures of something in the woods. We stopped to see what it was and were shocked to see our first bear sighting. August 23rd, Pinkham Notch Visitor Center south to the Great Gulf Trail form. This trail was harder than I had thought. The map seemed to suggest that this section was rather flat, but it climbed up and then descended after leaving the center through a hardwood forest and became steeper as it climbed to the auto road. We did see a lot of wildflowers, some aster, and hobby brush. After we crossed the road, we passed a trail to Lowe's Bald Spot, 2,860 feet. We passed the trail and stopped at a brook to eat our lunch. We looked at the map and the trail crossed several brooks. We had kept thinking that we were at the Great Gulf Trail, but no, it just went on and on. Just when we thought that we would not make it, we reached the Great Gulf Trail. It was very pretty from the bald spot into the Great Gulf Wilderness with a lot of spruce trees. We reached the suspension bridge over the Peabody River at the Great Gulf Junction. We had hiked this trail before, over this bridge, when we climbed up to Mount Washington. We had heard some birds a couple of times, and we passed some through hikers on the trail today. One of the hikers we saw at Lake of the Clouds, and even one who we had talked with earlier this month in Vermont, he said that he was from Idaho. The weather was great this morning, with temperatures in the 70s and breezy, but by later in the day, the temperatures had dropped with a light rain falling. August 26th, Mount Washington Summit north to Edmonds Coal Trail. We drove back to the summit of Mount Washington again. Today we had perfect weather with great visibility, 100% sunny skies, and the temperatures in the 70s. This hike was hard. The trail is totally covered with small rocks, sharp-pointed rocks, which stab through your feet. As we were hiking, our boots and hiking poles kept getting wedged between the rocks. The sun was beating down on us with no tree cover. However, the day was beautiful and we had great views. We saw a lot of hikers up on the ridges, and we constantly had people passing us on the trail both north and south. We saw day hikers, weekend hikers, and even some through hikers up here. There were a lot of people up here, but unfortunately, we saw some of them off the trail, trampling the delicate alpine plants, even though signs were posted to stay off the fragile alpine area. This was also mentioned on the CD book that was given to every driver that drove up to the summit. We crossed the cog train track, and it followed the trail for a distance. Then we saw the cog train coming up from the bottom as it was puffing out black coal smoke as it took passengers to the summit of Washington. We reached the Great Gulf Trail that we had done in 1997 when we climbed to the summit of Mount Washington. The view into the Great Gulf Wilderness was fantastic. The trail had been descending since we left the summit and climbed before we reached a trail for Mount Clay that made a loop to the top and returned back to the AT, and then we reached the Monticello lawn. I loved this lawn with the grass and the alpine flowers. The view here of Mount Jefferson was beautiful. We climbed again after Mount Jefferson, although the AT does not go up Mount Jefferson. Even though it may look like you are following a ridgeline from a distance on the presidential range, it does not. It constantly goes up and down, sometimes steeply over many rocks and between and over some boulders. The hike is hard and takes longer to cover a mile than you may think. We sat down near Mount Jefferson and looked down at the trail junction that we had planned as our turnaround point. We were so tired, but we knew that we had to climb down to the Randolph Path Trail and the Edmond Coal Trail Junction, a four-way junction. We saw some nice views at Dingmall Rock as we made our descent. We reached our junction for today, and this area had a few scrub pine trees, and we had also found some blueberries around the Sphinx Dome. We headed back and found some blueberries that were very delicious. They were sweetened by the sun. We were getting tired as we descended and then climbed up to Mount Washington, and Dave was getting a little grumpy. The haze had started to move into the valley below. However, everyone we had met had commented how nice the day was. We had got back to the parking lot around 6:30, just in time before the auto road closed. Shadows had covered the mountain and was casting shadows below. We were happy that we covered this section of the AT. However, the hike was more difficult than we had thought it would be. August 27th, the suspension bridge over the Peabody River south to the Osgood tent site. It was a nice sunny day with a light breeze, and the temperatures was a little warmer, over 80 degrees. We started this hike from the parking lot of the Great Gulf Trail and hiked to the suspension bridge over the Peabody River. I had mentioned this before. We did this trail in 1997. However, I had forgot most of this hike. I remembered that we had backpacked this trail and had set up at a stealth site after we had passed the Osgood tent site, and I had remembered that the trail was rather flat and short, until we reached the rock climb to the summit of Mount Washington. Today it felt like a long hike in just to reach the tent site. This area was beautiful in the pine forest, and we could hear the river flowing along the trail. We reached the suspension bridge over the Peabody River that we had been at a couple of days earlier. We needed to do the AT from here going south to the Osgood tent site. Today was much warmer than the other days this trip, and we felt it. We reached Osgood tent site, and it was nicer than I had remembered. I remember when we did the Great Gulf Trail that it only had 3 tent platforms and that they were close together and on top of each other. Now there was 4 of them, and they were spread further apart. We sat on one of the platforms for a while, and we ate our lunch. We met a thru hiker at the tent site who told us that the whites had killed his knees. He had told us that his favorite part of the AT so far was the section between New Jersey into New York. He told us that he was staying here tonight. On the way back, the white birch trees here was great, and as we were leaving, the sun had cast shadows in the woods. We had seen some small birds and heard some crows.